Okay, guys. I am going to talk to you about chapters 5 and 6 as quickly as I can. Okay, chapter 5 is super important because it's kind of like the turning point for Victor in his whole story, at least an initial turning point, because he actually succeeds at creating the monster. So in this beginning of the chapter, this is the part I told you guys about before, where you get very little description of what the monster looks like. This is really it right here. It says his limbs are in proportion. He had selected his features as beautiful. Originally, when he was putting him together from various body parts, he was assuming that he would look just like any human being. But to his astonishment, as this thing kind of comes to life, he realizes, whoa, this thing doesn't look really human. It just looks like a combination of random parts from different bodies, but it doesn't make a very nice looking human. So his yellow skin, hair that's lustrous and black that flows, meaning it's implying that he has longer hair. He does have pearly white teeth, but in combination with everything else, he just looks horrific. Watery eyes that seem almost the color, that seem almost the same color as the dun white sockets that they're set in, and a shriveled complexion with straight black lips. So, it's very different from what we get in our popular culture world, where we talked about the poster on my wall. He's actually a human being. His head is from someone's body, and then his other body parts are from other bodies. So he's a compilation of human parts. Part of the symbolism in his description of him is that probably he's not as ugly as he describes, but yet Victor is so disgusted with himself that now that he realizes what he's done, the creature or monster just looks so bad to him. He may not in reality look that bad. It's just his exaggerated emotion right now. He's not like, he's an ugly looking thing, but he's not horrific probably like Victor is interpreting it, because he's so horrified at his own actions. It's just magnifying it. Anyway, so the big thing about chapter 5 that's so important now is Victor, when he sees this monster come to life, he abandons it. He runs away and leaves it. And it's the whole idea of abandoning his own creation, as if he were a parent that gave birth to a child and then abandoned it because the child was too ugly. And that's really what it boils down to here. Victor in this chapter is now presenting himself as a very cowardly and fearful man that is not taking responsibility for the actions that he has committed. And that is the big sort of hinging theme that Mary Shelley wants you to get out of this book, or her readers, at the time. If you're gonna play around with science and you're going to take the risks to experiment with this kind of thing, then you have to take responsibility for the outcome and the consequences. And Victor has not obviously done that. So that's the main purpose of this chapter, is to sort of establish the fact that has happened. So at this point, we don't know where the monster is. When Victor returns back to his apartment, he's gone. And you're not going to find out where he's been for a while. But we just know that he's obviously gone somewhere, because when Victor gets back, he's not there. In the meantime, Henry comes to see Victor and is kind of coming to find out, where have you been? We haven't seen you in a couple years. And Victor is so horrified at what he's done, he literally physically gets so ill, he falls out into almost like a sort of coma for an extended period of time, several weeks. And Henry's there to kind of nurse him back to health. So there comes Henry, the selfless friend that is clueless about what Victor has done and is there to sort of pick him up and nurse him back to health. So at the end of the chapter, it's just, kind of leaves it with Henry sort of promising, I will help you with whatever it is you're dealing with. Whatever it is, I'm here for you, that kind of thing, but obviously never dreaming what Victor has been involved with. The other thing that I want you to notice is in this chapter, we're kind of tapping into some of those romantic traits that you guys have learned about in the slides, both romantic and Gothic traits. This is like the epitome of a Gothic scene here. Notice that at the beginning of the chapter, look when this takes place. It's dreary, it's at night, it's in November, that this monster comes to life. If it were a beautiful spring morning, that just wouldn't make sense. So one thing I want you guys to pay attention to throughout the rest of the book is how nature and the description of setting mirrors Victor's emotions and what's happening at those moments in the book. When it is a very terrible time in his life, usually it's winter time or turning winter and leaves are decaying and things are not green anymore, representative of obviously things dying and decaying. And then when Victor is up and has some false hope or confidence, or he thinks things are turning around, you'll see that weather is described as being sunny or in the springtime or beautiful. And romantics tend to do that in their writing. They tend to parallel how nature can be very inspiring and healing when times are good, and then how nature is very destructive and forceful and gloomy when times are bad. So writers tend to mirror the weather as an indication of the mood of the scene. So that kind of goes along with the little video on the Gothic that the girl told you about, the word metonymy, and it was on your little test that you had over your notes. It's like the way that a narrator, instead of having to explain in words, the weather does it for you. Same thing in a film. Instead of having a narrator tell you what the mood's supposed to be like or describe it, you're seeing it. So a funeral scene is often done on a rainy, dreary day in movies, and that's metonymy. It's a replacement for the need to explain something by doing it in a very brief and succinct way. And in books, it's done a lot of times through setting. So in chapter 6, continuing on, so Henry brings Victor a letter from Elizabeth, and she's just kind of, hey, what's going on? Where have you been? We're worried about you. Wanted to let you know our good friend Justine that grew up with us has moved back with us. She is tending to the children and kind of serving as a little nanny. Just kind of wanted you to know we're thinking of you and where have you been? And you can tell that she's feeling sort of neglected, and so it makes Victor feel guilty, right? Oh, sorry, I forgot to advance to chapter 6. It makes him feel guilty, of course, and he's starting then again to grapple with his guilt. So you've seen in the chapters so far that we've read where he's constantly tormented. He's constantly grappling with what he's done and how awful he knows this whole thing is, but yet he just can't help himself. And now he's abandoned this thing that's out there that probably needs somebody to help it. And he's got that guilt to deal with and the guilt of his abandonment of his family. So now you can see a theme developing here, a little, a motif, remember, mini theme of abandonment. You're going to see time and time again, Victor runs away from his problems. He abandons his problems. He abandons people by not accepting responsibility for his actions. So here you're seeing that again, and he struggles with it internally, but doesn't do anything about it. So anyway, so that is kind of the gist of the importance of chapter 6, but he then, in the chapter, Henry continues to nurse him back to health. If you notice later in the chapter, as as Victor is getting better, his health is sort of mirroring the seasons. Once again, summer passed away in these occupations, and my return to Geneva was fixed for the latter end of autumn. So as summer came around, Victor started feeling better. The weather was mirroring his heightened spirits and kind of starting to forget about what he had done. Henry was kind of making him feel better, making him sort of forget. And so many weeks had gone by that Victor's thinking, oh, maybe this thing's gone and I don't have to deal with it. So one thing to note, though, is towards the end of this chapter, Victor has a chance to go home. And he kind of makes some excuses. Maybe I shouldn't go home because the weather isn't good enough, and it's too hard to navigate through snow and ice. And then Henry's like, let's take a trip together before you go home. You've been through a lot. And Victor jumps on that. So in these last few paragraphs here at the end, you can see again he's avoiding facing reality by going home and kind of having to explain to his family where he's been and what he's been doing. So he and Henry go on this little trip together before he heads on back home to Geneva after 2 years, right? So, and he says, we went a fortnight into these perambulations. My health and spirit had long been restored, by the way, a fortnight is 2 weeks. So, avoidance, again, that sort of theme of avoidance and running away. So he ends, with feeling his spirits are high and bounding along with feelings of unbridled joy and hilarity, this false sense of hope and confidence that maybe he won't have to deal with this monster he created and things are going to be okay. And we know, as we've seen with every chapter, something at the end of the chapter is said to hint to us that foreshadow that it's just not going to be all good, that this is going to lead to something bad. So this is kind of that moment right here at the end where he lets us know, obviously, his high spirits can't last that long. Something's about to happen. So that's about it.